It was posted on the NAACP website and also on the McPan website. So there should be
Wow.
quite a few.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to reach out to a few more of the NAACP branches in the state too, the ones I could find
good.
email addresses for.
Good.
People are just starting to come in, so we'll maybe give them 1 or 2 more minutes before we get started.
So I was watching the Summer of Soul. I don't know, has anyone ever heard about the concert in Harlem in 1969 at the exact same time Woodstock was happening? Well,
No.
I just
I've
learned
watched it.
about this particular event from an interview with Questlove on one of the TV news shows I watched. So it was on for free on ABC this past week. I recorded it. It's available on Hulu with no commercials, and it is so interesting to the beginning of it and the period that we were in. I was thinking back. I said I was 12 years old doing all of this. Yeah. So 69, and it was the same year my aunt died, my father's youngest sister.
Oh,
Interesting. Yes.
I have Hulu, Robin, so I'm gonna make some time in the next few days to watch it.
It is going to be quite eye-opening, because you ever heard of what's happened before can happen again, and we ain't, history tends to repeat itself. So much of what they're talking about is like, are we not talking about that right now today?
Yep.
It was very interesting, and the star power, Stevie Wonder and Nina Simone, and it was incredible.
Yes. Yes.
And it's amazing that stayed in storage for so long.
Yes.
Nobody wanted to publish it. They said that it just sat in the vaults for a couple decades, and
wow.
amazing. Yeah. They didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Okay, we'll wait for about 45 more seconds and then we'll get started. I'm starting the recording.
Recording in progress.
And Laura, if you want to start sharing your screen, I think we can start.
Okay, good evening, everyone. It looks like we have 25 participants this evening.
Mhm.
I see some familiar faces, so welcome. And our theme, our discussion, our HRC this evening is what is critical race theory? And you're going to hear, you may have heard a lot of controversy about this issue. So tonight we hope to dispel the myths and really get a better understanding as to really what critical race theory is. As always, we're going to encourage dialogue, open dialogue. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions when we go into a final session, and just share your thoughts on critical race theory. So as normal with CREED, we always have our working agreements and our land acknowledgement. And we're going to go through that in a minute. And then also, I just want to talk about, we have our moderator this evening, Alan Russell. His first name is William, but he prefers Alan. So he'll be the discussion moderator. So our guest panelists are this evening, Ms. Tracy Perry. She's relatively new to the Monroe Community College family. She's the Director of Enrollment Management. So welcome, Tracy. And we have Ms. Robin West Smith, who's a sociology adjunct professor at the college. So welcome, ladies. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Amy Zarin, who's going to talk about our working agreements.
Good evening, everybody. So our working agreements are really just to keep us all on the same page as we work through different topics. So we have them on the screen, but I'm just going to read them as well. So our working agreements, first, to help to minimize background noise, please remain muted the entire time. One of our speakers or hosts will ask you to unmute when the time comes. Please keep your camera on whenever possible. This really helps to enhance group connection, especially when you're addressing the presenter. I'm the exception right now because I am currently in my car, so I apologize for that. While on camera, minimize other work if at all possible, electronics, eating, just to respect all other participants. It is acceptable and, it's kind of expected to be a little bit uncomfortable at times, and that's okay. We acknowledge that racism, sexism, classism, heterosexism, and other forms of discrimination and oppression exist. Our primary commitment is to learn from each other in a respectful manner. We will listen to each other and not talk at each other. We will not demean, devalue, or put down people for their experiences, lack of experiences, or difference in interpretation of those experiences. We will trust that people are always doing the best they can, and we will respectfully challenge ideas and not the person.
Okay, thank you, Amy. And now we'll have our land acknowledgement read by Laura.
These lands are occupied lands that are sometimes called Southeast Michigan, that are ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Adirondack or Neutrals Wyandot Nation and the Anishinaabe, which include the Three Fires Council of Ojibwe, Ottawa, the Potawatomi or Potawatomi peoples, as well as the Sauk, Meskwakasina, Fox, Meskwauton, and Miami tribes. Respect and honor are given to all their elders, past and present.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Okay, so before I hand it over to William, just want to give a little bit of background, because this whole issue of critical race theory has been really has become very visible in the last, I'd say, 18 to 24 months. And there's a lot of misconception as to really what it is. So I always like to research subject matter. So I did a little research online. I just want to read a couple sentences before I turn it over to William and the panelists. This was on a website, a news website, and it says, for example, lawmakers in Tennessee and Idaho have banned its teaching critical race theory from their public schools curriculum, while parents in Texas are opposing a school district's efforts to combat racism with lessons in cultural awareness, seen by some as critical race theory. It's a concept that has been around for decades and that seeks to understand and address inequality and racism in the US. The term also has been politicized and been attacked by its critics as Marxist ideology. That's a threat to the American way of life. I was actually in an environment, a school environment, where one of the attendees, who was a parent, actually said that it was racism. Critical racism theory recognizes that systemic racism is a part of American society and challenges the beliefs that allow it to flourish. So with that, I just want to give you just a brief background as to what critical race theory is. And now I will turn it over to William and the panelists. I think you're muted.
I know, this is my first Zoom.
That's okay. We've all been there, William. I mean,
That's
Alex.
my story and I'm sticking to it. Okay, no, all right. welcome everyone, and thank you for participating. We will have a breakout session where there'll be discussion between all the individuals that are involved and the participants that are involved tonight. So this is directed to either of our panelists. Tell us in a few words what critical race theory is and what it is not.
Well, Tracy doesn't mind. I'd like to go and answer this question because I literally just had to answer this question twice for my 2 lectures in the past few days. We are just about to embark on race and ethnicity in our principles of sociology class. And because I do teach a majority white school, teach at a majority white school with a majority white students in rural Michigan, I told them I needed them to truly understand what CRT is and what is not in comparison to what we're doing today. And so I had them look in their index in their sociology book. I said, do you see critical race theory in your index? So they all went to their index. They said, no, we don't see it. I said, okay, go back to the race and ethnicity chapter. Look at all the key terms in the race and ethnicity chapter. Do you see critical race theory in the index, in the key terms? They checked, they said no. I said, okay, so CRT is not taught in K through 12. Contrary to anything you hear, CRT is taught in college law classes. You're in a college class, but you're not in a college law, pre-law class. It is taught in the pre-law program to get you to help you understand, in the law school program, to help you understand systemic and institutionalized racism in the justice system, period. Anything else that you hear, that you see on TV, that you see at these school board meetings, is all, as someone that we all are very familiar with likes to say, fake news. And I wanted it to be clear because, ironically enough, this is the first time since I've been teaching this course I have had to address something like this. So that's how I have tried to explain it to my students. Tracy, did you want to add anything else?
Yes, I was introduced into critical race theory until my doctorate studies at Central Michigan University. And it's also used when teaching education type courses, because not only is it injustice in our judicial system, but also in our educational system. And it's just based off some of the tenets of critical race, such as racism is built into American society. And if we look back at when certain institutions, such as the predominantly white institution that we both work here at, it wasn't really made for people outside of the majority system. And it's just, it's giving voice to people that aren't part of the master narrative. And it's a way to do research and just to show others what people outside of themselves experience on a day-to-day life. So it's really a tool, like was said, to address racism and the inequities that people of different color experience outside of the master narrative. And I agree that it's something that you do not teach in K. It's something that it's not really, like most theories aren't taught in the K-12 system.
Exactly. Even in the direct college program, the principles of sociology course, we discuss race and ethnicity and helping them to understand that race is socially constructed. You need to judge who you are based on your ethnicity. Right. And we have had a multi-variation of ethnicities in America, and they have been discriminated against. I also help my students understand the key words: prejudice, discrimination, and racism. And I tell them, unless you have money and power, you cannot be a racist. You can be prejudiced, you can have an attitude, you can even sometimes take an action and be discriminatory, but you're not a racist until you get money and power, and then you make someone else feel like they are not sufficient. And I think a lot of people don't understand that distinction. I mean, we've got people now that are afraid to even say certain things because I don't want to be called a racist. Well, and I ask them, I said, do you have some money? You got some power? Do you have any kind of superiority over me at this point in time? If not, I will say what you're doing is you're showing your maybe bigotry, your prejudice, but you have not accomplished racism yet. That's a high bar, a very high bar.
Can we ask questions now, or is that going to be?
Yes, Florence, go ahead.
So Tracy, how did your students respond when in your classroom when you had them research and you explained to them that CRT was not in the books?
Oh, that was me, Florence. That was me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Robin. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
So how, well, again, keep in mind, Florence, I'm in a rural Michigan school, majority white. And in this particular class, everyone is white. I had a couple of students who looked at me like, oh my goodness, like it was the first time they'd ever heard this. I had another student who's, hoping to go to law school, pretty much shake his head. Yep, she's explaining it correctly. I also did something that I don't think any teacher has ever done before. And I told my students, I said, you're lucky that I am African-American because I can do this with you and we're going to all understand what this means. Whereas if someone else does this with you, I can promise you it would be perceived totally different. I explained to them the difference between the two N words. The N word that ends with the letter A and the N word that ends with the letter ER. And as I explained it to them, I said, when you see the N word with the ER ending, you're seeing a racial slur. When you're seeing the N word with an A at the end, you're seeing a term of endearment. However, I would caution all of you all standing here right now, do not say that to your Black friend if you have one, unless you have a relationship such as Dr. Dre and Eminem. When you have that kind of relationship with your Black friends, you may be able to come to that level where you can say the N word with the A on the end. But again, that is still something you want to be careful with. And I think even with Dr. Dre and Eminem, it is also their culture, the genre, and the music. And, they have said, Eminem has sometimes been referred to as the blackest white boy you've ever seen. You also have to understand too that there are other terms now that are being formed to get around this. And I know one of the more recent terms that's used among some young white males is wigger. And it was so funny. The first time I heard that, I don't think they thought I knew what it meant. And I looked at the young men and I said, I do know what that means. And they all kind of got quiet. But that, again, that's within the comfort of certain groups. They know that they have a relationship and they can say certain things in terms. As a matter of fact, I came across a list of slang terms that Generation Z is using right now. And I looked through the entire list and some of the words I was expecting to see, I didn't see. Well, for the most part, there was still very, quite a few of slang terms used by Generation Z. And when we can understand their language, we can also communicate to them and help them understand some of these key principles, as they say, using their language. And so that's why I basically talk to my students in the forum and help them to understand what CRT is and what it is not. Did that answer your question, Florence?
Yes, thank you, Robin. Thank you.
Ms. Robin, can you explain a little more the idea that you can't be racist unless you have money and power? Do you have
because
to have
from a social scientist perspective, we define racist as being an individual who has some type of jurisdiction over other individuals, and based on the characteristics of those individuals, such as their race and or ethnicity, The individual who has that form of control over a group of individuals has a method of separating those individuals from other individuals. And they do it generally from the perspective of economics, social, and political. Now, that's how we explain it as social scientists.
And then too, in the theory itself, there's different tenets within the theory of critical race. And one is that whiteness is property. So if you have ownership, whether that's from a monetary or from a power standpoint, you can then dictate, like Robin had said, how another group feels, what type of resources that they have. As a Black American, to be racist, I would have to not allow someone to buy a home, to buy a car, to get an education, to go live in a certain neighborhood. And as a marginalized group here in America, we just don't have that type of power. So, and so you don't necessarily have to have money, but to own whiteness as property, you have power to dictate how others live and what assets they're able to acquire.
In addition to what Tracy said, I found it quite interesting that former President Trump has taken to calling the 3 prosecutors who happen to be people of color who are prosecuting him for investigating him for various reasons. He called them all racist at a rally that was attended to by mostly white people with a few Black people sprinkled behind them. He's chosen that term racist for a reason, because he understands to be a racist, you have to have some kind of power over someone who doesn't look like you. However, as Tracy is saying, you cannot just simply say, I'm a racist. You know, if Tracy were to say, or myself, I'll use myself, I'm a professor, okay? If I decide that, okay, the student that's sitting over here in this desk reminds me of someone I knew from my past, and she happens to be white. And then I got a student over here who may be biracial or Hispanic or Muslim, and I say, well, okay, regardless of how you all each answer your questions on your exam, the Muslim student, the Hispanic student, you're always going to get an A. But the white student, I'm going to make you really, really prove to me. That's when I'm demonstrating some form of racism, because I have power over those students from the educational institution perspective.
Robin, Judy Bishalis asks, you say that you have to have money and power to be a racist. Do you have to have both?
Yes, from a social scientist perspective. Again, I'm a social scientist, so I'm telling you this from a social scientist perspective. In some institutions, you may hear some, especially in the political science arena, you may hear a different variation of it. Mm-hmm. I'm also looking at Julie's second question, and it's interesting. Judy, I'm sorry, you say, do most white people have power? Well, that is I don't want to say misnomer, but that is the nomer or the assumed position. You got to also look at, are we talking about rich white people or are we talking about poor white people? Because during slavery, even a poor white person had more power over a slave, than a slave had over a slave, so to speak, or a free man had over. And that was the interesting thing about that. Tracy, what do you think?
I think it's built from an institutional standpoint. If we look at the fabric of America, and it was how it was not set up. It was primarily set up for the white male. It wasn't even set up for white women. And because of that, people weren't allowed to vote. People weren't allowed to own houses. So the question of what it says, what about a poor white person? Do they still can be looked at differently when it comes to a credit application, even though they might not have the same type of finances or someone of a different ethnicity, they're going to be viewed differently just because of the color of their skin. I remember recently there was a story about a Black couple that was trying to sell their home, and it was way undervalued. So what they had another appraiser come in, and they took out all the Black photos, and they had one of their friends stand in as a homeowner, and it appraised for, I think, at least what, $20,000 more, just because, you know, it was a Black person who owned this home. So
Yes.
I would say that, yes, you don't necessarily, so a poor white person still has power, because the systems are already built to help them stay ahead.
Might we call that white privilege?
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
We have an exercise called the Privilege Walk. Now, Dr. Paul Hadeen won the Diversity Award a few years ago for doing a walk, doing the Privilege Walk as a event after school one time. I have done the Privilege Walk in my classroom, and it was the last semester that we were all still in public facing. I was looking at my evaluations, and I actually had a student comment on that walk, and that student said, you know, making us do that Privilege Walk made me uncomfortable. It made it look like you were segregating us and picking on us. And I read that, and I'm thinking, why would you perceive that unless you were the one who won and you didn't want to be the one that I said would be the privileged one? And then ironically enough, what happens two and a half years later after we come out of, you know, and went through this pandemic and everything, we have people now talking about being made uncomfortable if they have to hear, or if their student is uncomfortable, if they have to hear conversations about race and racism or critical race theory. And we had even in Indiana, the state of Indiana education system, a district in the state of Indiana allowed their students, their parents, to opt out of teaching Black history during Black History Month.
Mhm.
How do you opt out of Black History Month? As I explained to my students, we had a week, and then we eventually got a whole month, thanks to President Gerald Ford, who was from Michigan, by the way. I said, but imagine that. Now you're being told, well, you know what, if you think talking about Black history is going to make your child uncomfortable, you can opt out. As I explained to them, I said, there was never need for white history, because that's all the history that was ever written.
Mm-hmm.
It was never written from any other perspective but white male property owners. Even the early sociologists, white male. And
Yes.
we didn't even get all of the other perspectives we needed until what, in the late 40s, 50s? 1940s, 50s, that is.
Yes, Robin, and Dr. Kojo agrees. He says CRT is not a replacement for teaching Black history, right? And then Florence has her hand up, and then Julie Stewart has a question as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to build upon what Tracy said and slightly disagree with Robin, and also agree with what Alan said, because in my opinion, regardless of your economic status, if you grow up not very poor and you're white, you've always experienced white privilege.
Right.
So in my opinion, having money or not having money, it's the fact that you have white privilege. So if I go to a bank and try to apply for a loan and I get turned down because the color of my skin, and this person who it could be poor, and they walk into a bank and they get the loan. So I personally don't think an everyday practical application here on day-to-day living as a Black person in this country, it doesn't matter how much money you have or how much money you don't have. If you're white, you have that systemic white privilege that Black people and people of color don't have. So that to me is if you feel because you have white privilege, you have the power over me because I am a Black person and these systemic institutional policies and procedures are set up, then that's racism. Then you feel that you're a racist. I mean, you're a racist. That's just my thought.
Okay, Julie Stewart asks, is that kind of like class issues? Like anybody can be poor and powerless, but CRT looks at that. Tracy, do you have anything to say about that? And then we'll move on to our next question.
Let's see, let me go back. You said,
Yeah.
It's similar to classism because depending on someone's economic status, you can look down, but it goes deeper than that because a person can have, a Black person or another marginalized group of people can have money and still be looked down upon. I believe that the basis of racism is to, again, going back to the privilege, to make one group of people think that they're better than another group, no matter how much money that group has. So I can have as much education, as much money, own as many properties, but to some people, I will still, I will be followed around stores because of the color of my skin. I might be stereotyped, because another theory I'm looking at is stereotype threat theory, just because of the color of my skin. So yes, it does mimic classism in a way, but it goes beyond that because it's just not about money.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Cody has his hand up.
Right. Cody?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, 1 second. Let me turn my phone on. There we go. See, I think it's important. Okay. See, I also wanted to bring up like the history of my understanding of my studies of CRT and why there's controversy over it. It seems to be due to this one person named Christopher Rufo. I'm not sure if anybody has heard of them, but they came up on Fox News in the summer of 2020, complaining about DEI training and asking Donald Trump to issue an executive order to end it in the government. I'm not sure if any of you remember Trump doing that soon afterwards, but the main issue is that Christopher Rufo has, for some reason, conflated critical race theory with ideas of racial essentialism or naturalism, the belief that race isn't a social construct, but is something inherent in people. And instead of acknowledging that that was a mischaracterization, because the works of people like Robert Delgado specifically state that CRT is meant to combat ideas of essentialism, Rufo doubled down and said that CRT essentially was reinforcing racial essentialism, and as he used that in order to create the moral panic that we see today over critical race theory. Robert Oliver, or John Oliver, and last week Tonight Show actually came out with a summary on CRT and the conflict over it yesterday. So I suggest looking that up too.
Yes, Cody, I'm aware of Christopher Rufo. Joanne Reed interviewed him on her show, and it was quite an interesting interview. And I do follow John Oliver as far as his clips. I used to watch his show all the time, but I kind of just follow his clips now.
Okay, one more question, and then we're going to move on to our next topic point, okay? Julie Stewart says, how do you talk to white people who are not in power and aren't receptive to learning this? For instance, she needs to know how to talk to her friends.
Well, I think another tenet of CRT is counter storytelling. And you really don't understand what a person goes through until you are able to walk in their shoes. And there's a lot of research that uses critical race theory as a qualitative measure to use that storytelling. And I just think that, for one, listening to other people's stories outside of our own, and also to be around other people. I mean, sometimes we just have to step out of the box and be open to make friendships with people who look different than us, and just be interested in learning more about that. What do you think, Robin?
Well, I have the luxury of working part-time at a theater in Detroit, a Broadway theater. And our staff has been the most diverse staff you could ever imagine, the most diverse staff. And so I have come to count them as my family more than just my friends. And we have all learned from each other. And it is interesting because the whites who are in our group have asked us. I've literally had some of my white co-workers come to me, to my home, and ask me, how do I do this and how do I talk about that? And they feel comfortable to come and talk to me about these things. You know, for example, what you asked about, Julie, because first and foremost, they know I'm gonna be honest with them. But second, they also know that I'm not offended by their questions because we have a relationship. And I have also encouraged them to be very careful. You can't just walk up to everyone and ask them the questions that you're asking me. As you know, especially other people of color that you may know.
Okay.
And let's move on to the next question. The next question is, how did you develop an interest in critical race theory?
So I could start with this one. So I didn't develop an interest again until it was probably about 3 years ago. And this was pre-pandemic. So when I started my EDD program at Central, we were part of a cohort. And even though it was an online program, we were to meet in person that first semester. And for those of you who may or may not know, Mount Pleasant is where Central is located, which is, even though they have a somewhat of a Black student population, there is not a lot of Black people who live in Mount Pleasant. And at the time, there was a lot of videos going around while Black was what they called it. So like barbecuing while Black, or walking your dog while Black. And at the time, there was a thing that was renting an Airbnb while Black. A lot of stories have been done where different Black people have rented Airbnbs in different scenarios, and the police were called on them, or certain instances that happened. And I have a lot of food allergies or whatnot. And when I went up there, I thought I was gonna, being in education, I thought I was gonna, research stuff about transfer education, hence why I'm here at the Monroe County Community College from a 4-year, because I believe that it all starts at the 2-year. But I rented an Airbnb and I didn't know anything about Mount Pleasant, and I was nervous at the fact that I would be in this predominantly white neighborhood, and as a Black woman by myself in Mount Pleasant, I didn't know what was going to happen. So when I was in class and we were talking about the different theories, and I asked my professor, I'm like, well, do you think that Black students at predominantly white institutions feel race-related stress in an online classroom? And she was like, I don't know. So that was a topic of research. And of course, critical race theory is the basis of how I would go about answering that question. So that's how I became interested in that theory, or in this theory.
Florence, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't, but thank you. I probably do, but I'll keep my comments to myself. No, what she says is so true, because you guys may have heard this before. Back in June of 2020, whenever we first started the HRCs. I had just recently moved in 2019 to this neighborhood. And some of you may know I love riding my bike. And but I hesitated for 2 weeks because I thought the same thing, Tracy. I thought, am I? And there's some Black families in this neighborhood, don't get me wrong, there's not a lot. But I had that thought in my mind because several years ago in a community in Toledo, Ohio, a Black woman was just walking through a very wealthy white area, and someone called because she was walking through the street and felt that she didn't belong. So that thought stuck in my head, plus just living day-to-day racism. So I thought, for 2 weeks, I thought, can I ride my bike in this neighborhood? And finally, when I finally did start riding it, I was always looking over my shoulder and making sure, am I okay, this and that. It took a while for me to finally just take a breath and say, okay, I can do this. It doesn't bother me now. But and even still, when I first moved here, I'd walk out to the street to get my mail, and people would say, well, how long have you been here? And I had to legitimize myself by saying, oh, I just moved. And also I'm a trustee on the Monroe Community College. And you could see their whole demeanor just relax. It's like, oh, okay, she's okay. But I had to do that for several times. So I understand what Tracy's saying, you know, so this is, it's true. It's real.
Okay, we've got a question, or I think it's more of a statement from Cody. Prejudice plus power definition works better as a definition for institutionalized racism. I think it is important to subcategorize types and expressions of racism in order to be specific. So I think it's more of a statement. And then did someone, I think we kind of talked about it, the difference between racism and prejudice.
Again, as a social scientist, we define prejudice as the attitude that you have, and racism as the full-blown action that you can impart, or pain per se, you can impart on someone because they happen to have the characteristic that certain groups of people find significantly different from other groups.
And to add to that, like, I know someone said, well, can a Black person be racist? And, you know, again, going back to the power, but yes, Black people, Asian people, anyone can be prejudiced against another group because you can discriminate against a certain group, or saying that, you know, I don't want to sit at that table, or I don't want to be friends with someone, or I think that all people are like that. And that goes back to stereotypes. But the root word of racism is race. And in order to be, you have to have some type of power to use your race as a form of power or a weapon.
And then don't forget about implicit bias.
Yes.
We tend to cross the terms prejudice, discriminatory, racism in with just plain old implicit biases, where we may look at it and be like what you went through, Florence. People have implicit biases. Tracy, what you kind of experienced. You know, I tell my students, I have some implicit biases, and we are not always necessarily aware of these implicit biases until they're brought to our attention.
Right.
And I think if we understand that our actions and attitudes towards certain people based on what we think we know about them, like, for example, how many of you all kind of flinch if you see someone with body art? And by body art, I mean tattoos. And when you see that the tattoos are extremely pronounced, how many of us have just looked and been like, ooh, okay, he probably from some rough gang or something.
Or biker, or yeah.
Right. And that is our implicit bias. And I say that because one of our daughters went away to college on the East Coast, came back with tattoos. And for her, we all couldn't figure it out because it's like, why is the square of the family getting tattoos? And I tell her, you know, people that can see some of her tattoos do kind of look at her, and she's like, yeah, I know, kind of interesting to see a young Black girl like me with a tattoo, huh? And she enjoys it because it gives her something to conversate about. But yeah, I mean, there are many different things. People, let's say we're walking and we see someone who happens to have a nose ring on, or we see some young people who get into that Gothic way of dressing. You know, we all kind of stop and look and be like, let me go the other way. I mean, I can give you guys an example of what happened to me one night, but that's a whole nother story. But we all have our implicit biases.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the next question. Is CRT restricted to Black history, or does it cover other races?
It definitely covers other races. And just doing my research, a lot of other groups use CRT to give voice to some of their concerns. And it kind of goes back to one of the tenets, which talks about, you know, it's kind of like if you classify, you make everything a Black and white issue. And if you are able to make everything a Black and white issue, other groups don't feel like they're protected, or they feel like they have to choose a side. And more often than not, they go with the majority side. And until something happens, like COVID and Asian Americans, you know, all of a sudden the attention was taken off Black Americans and it was put on Asian Americans because I have a friend. She was at a conference in Texas at the time. She's Chinese and with her white husband, and she had a woman walk over to her. She was born here in America. Go back to your country. You brought this to our country. So it's just not a black and white issue. There are, Native Americans who can use critical race theory. It's any marginalized group that that can use the tenets of critical race to explain what has happened to them and why it has happened. So that's really what it is. It's what has happened and why it has happened. And it's an explanation of that. So no, it's not a black and white issue. And part of the problem in America is that we make everything black and white.
Okay, thank you. I think we've kind of answered this question, but I'm going to read it anyhow. Is CRT meant to be taught at all levels of education, or is it better suited at higher education? Higher levels.
I would say as a college professor and actually in the high school teaching college level introductory courses, you have to be careful. I think it could probably be introduced at a surface level in a junior college class, but as with all the other discussions in sociology, in social science, that it would be saved for a full-blown class as the upper level of college, and like maybe the junior and senior years.
Mm-hmm. Tracy, did you want to add anything to that?
Like I said, I was in it. It depends on the field, of course, like if you like sociology, education, or law. But in some areas, I think people don't really look at it until they start doing research too. And it depends on when that research interest actually occurs. Sometimes it can be an undergrad, like Robin said, in the junior or senior year, but I think mostly it's used in graduate level coursework outside of law and other social science arenas.
All righty, okay. My last question before we go into our breakout sessions. In your opinion, why is there so much controversy over CRT, and why has it become so political?
Culturally speaking, it is the easiest cultural war we can have, okay? Also, go back to Reconstruction. What did we see happen after Reconstruction? During Reconstruction, we immediately saw new laws being passed because African-American free slaves were being elected to Congress and initiating laws and passing laws to benefit free slaves. And white male slave owners, previous slave owners, became threatened, felt threatened. They were really literally scared. Oh, they're gonna do to us what we've been doing to them. So we gotta pass some laws. When we look at the controversy, again, what happened in 2008, we knew it was coming. Reconstruction 2.0. CRT is the new boogeyman for Reconstruction 2.0, and for there to be some type of cultural advantage point from a political perspective to try to at least win more elections. When you break it down to just that bare minimum, you can see that if you take away that boogeyman, CRT, what else do you have to argue when you're trying to argue privilege?
Tracy, did you have anything to add to that? Why is it so much controversy over CRT, and why has it become so political?
The reason why is because they're trying to make it political. It's something that has nothing to do with politics. But as Robin said earlier, like if we can ban certain studies or quiet certain voices, it's a way to, quiet voices, I think. Going back to, not, banning, Black History Month. I mean, there was some controversy in Texas a little while ago where a parent has said in the textbook, it took slavery out. They don't want to talk about slavery anymore. They want to, call slaves migrant workers. So how can you erase history? And if it's just a tool to, CRT is not trying to be divisive, like going back to what it is not. It is not a tool to be divisive. It is a tool for activism to help certain groups of people and to break down those barriers. So if you attack something that's used to abolish racism, then if you attack it, and it goes, so there's another notion about color blindness. A lot of people say, oh, I don't see color. Color doesn't matter. But if you don't see color, that goes against everything about CRT, because then you're saying that none of these things, these inequities don't exist. None of these things ever happen to people. And if you don't have to acknowledge that this happened, then you don't have to fix it. If you don't acknowledge there's a problem, that's something you don't have to fix. So if we do away with it, then we're making things the way they were. We're not going against the grain, so to say.
Alan, before you take the two questions, Florence and Pamela, Cody put in the chat, because of Christopher Rufo and others who have caught on to this mischaracterization of CRT as promoting racial essentialism. Yes, Cody, you are correct. As with Frank Luntz back in the 90s, Frank Luntz learned that if you use certain words in the political dichotomy, you can convince people of a whole lot of things. So they're called buzzwords, if you will. The whole point of the quote buzzwords are so that you can strike fear in people and maintain a certain superiority over certain people. But it still all comes down to trying to win elections. So, Alan, I'll turn it back over to you, and you got three people with their hands up.
Yes, Penny.
And then Alan, when we, for this, could we come to these questions after the breakout rooms? We were going to send everybody to a breakout room so you can discuss question number 5 further. I'll send you there and oops, excuse me. We'll get to Florence, Parnella, and Cody's questions right after.
Could we let's deal with the questions. I'm not sure. I think let's deal with the questions first.
Okay.
The breakout rooms, I'm not sure how much that will generate since the question was answered, but the breakout rooms was answered by our panelists. So I'm just suggesting that we deal with the questions as we run out of time.
Okay.
Parnella first.
I apologize. I think Florence, her hand was up first. I don't want to get in front of her.
No, that's fine. Go ahead, Parnella.
Okay, thank you for allowing me to. I really just want to comment. I don't know if people are aware of the fact that some African Americans suffer from PTSD as a result of dealing with racism. I've spent my entire career doing that, 34 years being pretty much the only one. So when we have these types of discussions, my heart is always racing because I feel overwhelmed by the topic. I think that ladies have done a great job, but looking at CRT alone, I think kind of doesn't give context to the broader issue. And I would agree with Robin that Reconstruction is a good example of what happens when African American people make progress and are able to begin to prosper and thrive and have freedom in a society that was never created for them to do so. And so this was a bipartisan effort, by the way, because all the politicians, they decided to remove the troops from because of the Southern Democrats. And so Reconstruction ended. Is someone saying something? Because I'm getting feedback. Anyway, I just want to say that I believe this CRT boogeyman, it's not a real thing. It's just a backlash for the progress we've made with having the first African-American president. And now with voter suppression, I think these are just tools. It's part of the backlash of the progress that we make. And I would just like to say two things, and I'm actually going to quote two people. I'm going to paraphrase, and then I'm going to stop talking. Two people, I think, said some things that were very important then and are as important now. Malcolm X said, and I'm paraphrasing, "Only a fool would allow his enemy to educate his children." That is still true today. And Dr. King said toward the end of the movement that he believed he might be delivering his people into a burning house. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I can't hear. I'm not hearing.
She's done. Florence?
Okay.
Yeah,
All
and quickly
yeah.
running out of time. I'm the timekeeper. That's my job today.
Okay, I'm just going to say, I just want to comment and agree with everything these ladies have said. Particularly, it is a very political issue. It's about getting votes. We know that statistics show, I've not seen the 2020 census yet, but we all know that America is browning. And this goal to keep white supremacy in place is even magnified by all this. So all it's political. It's about getting people elected, getting communities riled up to get those very conservative votes in. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being conservative, but this is just another ploy to keep the white supremacy. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Cody?
Cody, yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to expand on what was said before about buzzwords. Christopher Rufo himself has admitted to trying to use CRT and making it into a buzzword. I shared a link to a tweet that he had shared before, but he basically admitted, I'll quote it here. He said, "We have successfully frozen their brand, critical race theory, into the public conversation and are steadily driving up negative perceptions. We will eventually turn it toxic as we put all the various cultural insanities under that brand category. The goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and immediately think critical race theory. We have codified the term and will recodify it to annex the entire range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans." And so he pretty much gave away the game plan by saying that in public. And
that,
I think it's
that is why Joy Reid brought him on to interview him.
Yep. And I think it's rather tragic because I agree with trying to address the issues of believing in a racial essentialism, but he took the wrong course in mischaracterizing critical race theory, and that's why I can't stand for it, because he's spreading misinformation, and I can't stand for that.
Thank you for your comments, everybody.
All right.
Ellen?
Yes, well, Penny, do you think we have time to go to breakouts or?
Probably not. We try to keep these to an hour, but we would like to continue the conversation. Coach?
Yeah, I think let's see if people have questions or comments. We're not going to go into a breakout room at this. It's very interesting discussion so far.
Yeah.
And I agree with this buzzword concept of CRT.
Some of the people that have not commented. I'm not going to call on you, but you can raise your hand.
Raise your hand or unmute yourself.
Yep. Okay.
What about our presenters? Do they have any closing comments?
Well, as a new employee of Monroe County Community College, I just want to say that I'm very happy to be a part of this discussion tonight and to be a part of the community. And I hope to see a lot of great things happen here at the college and to be a part of it.
We're happy to have you. Thank you, Tracy.
Well, I thank you again, Penny, for allowing me to participate in this panel. You all know that I do not shy away from panel discussions. I keep a picture up here on my wall with Dr. DeVries, may his soul rest in peace, and another couple of people that we did the panel. I think it was my first panel, and we were talking about Colin Kaepernick. And was it disrespectful to take a knee? And when you think about that in context, how many people got so bent out of shape about him taking a knee. And people who didn't know their history didn't realize Dr. King took a knee. They took knees in civil rights movement. But if you didn't get bent out of shape by our Capitol being attacked, I don't know what to tell you. Because I can promise you, taking a knee is nowhere near attacking the Capitol, our center of government. So I've enjoyed my 7 years here at Monroe, and I look forward to 7 more.
Amen. Amen.
We hope to have you for many more, Robin.
Okay, I'd like to thank Robin and Tracy and Dr. Kojo and Penny for letting me be part of this. And any last words from you, Miss Penny?
Me?
Final words to Florence, and there's Laura, and then there's Amy, but Florence, any of you want to speak and close us out? Florence.
Okay, just a couple of comments. First of all, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you for having a very candid discussion. It's been very interesting, giving the different perspectives. And I just want to end by saying, we all know that this is Black History Month, and really it should be more than just a month. We should celebrate 365. And I will say, I want to give a shout out to the Robert Duncanson Society. There was a special event this past Saturday that was just outstanding. If you had not had a chance to visit the battlefield, there's a art exhibit from the Black artists from Detroit, and 2 of them came down. The exhibit is fabulous, but 2 of them came down. Our esteemed president was the MC, and I believe Denise Gray is on the call. She's part of the society, and I'm not sure who else is on here who's part of the society. But it was just a wonderful event. You have to go out there. The exhibit will still be there until the end of the month. But it's just fabulous. It was 80 people there, apparently. It was the largest in the theater. If you haven't been to the theater, the theater is fabulous. So if you get a chance to go out there to visit, please do so. And there were some other events around the community for Black History Month. So, we should, I hope at one point in time, we get to the point where it's not just relegated to 1 month. There's so much. When I did those profiles last year, the amount of information I didn't know, inventors, artists, you name it, historians, it's just phenomenal. So we have to move forward on this. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Kojo, you have any final thoughts?
I'm sorry.
You have any final thoughts?
Oh, well, thank you all for being here. It's some uncomfortable conversations. We need to have them. And what's important about CREED is that we do have these conversations, and we're going to keep it going. So thank you all for being here this evening. This is just the beginning of the CRT conversation, and hopefully we'll move on beyond Black History Month. We are we're the ones who keep it to a month, folks. We can have Black History any month we want. We can do these events in March, April, May, all year round. We can do it.
And Black history is American history.
Yes.
Yes.
Final word there. Thank you, Alan, for doing this, and Penny and everybody. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you next time.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for moderating, Alan.
Planning committee, stay on for a second. Well, I'm not in charge here. But Florence.
Yeah, we can stay on for a few minutes. That's fine.
Okay. I'm the one who's got to pick up.
Good night.